Hello, good afternoon, and welcome everyone. Thank you for being present today. We're hosting this seminar on what Odisha got right with its finances and what's the way forward for this state. We're hosting this in collaboration with the India Public Finance Collaboration. So this is like a group of organizations which decided to come together some time back to build knowledge and engage meaningfully on PFM issues in the Indian landscape. And we're happy to have some of the members from the participatory organizations in the audience today, as well as on the panel today. So, introducing to you to a very interesting panel we have here. We have Dr. Jugal Kishore Mahapatra as our keynote speaker, and he is the current chairman of the Administrative and Governance Reforms Committee in Odisha. He has also held multiple positions in the state of Odisha, including the Chief Secretary Finance and Chief Secretary to the to the government of Odisha. Thank you, sir, for coming all the way from Bhubaneswar. We are more than delighted to have you here. He has deep insights in governance and the bureaucratic culture of the state. Amarjeet, sir, here, our in-house expert on governance reforms. He is a senior fellow at CSEP, and he brings extensive experience in governance reforms and will be able to shed light on the administrative side of the issues. Prabhat here is the Director of Public Finance Management at Janagara Center for Citizenship and Democracy. He works closely with states and constitutional bodies on PFM reforms and state capabilities. Finally, Devashish, he's the Vice President and Head of Strategic Public Finance at CGIS Foundation. He leads engagements with state governments on fiscal decision making across social and economic sectors. So, why we have gathered here today is to give you some context. A little over 2 decades back, the state of Odisha was in a fiscal crisis. It had high fiscal deficit, a debt that exceeded 50% of the state GSDP, liquidity crisis to the extent that state treasuries had to be closed for several days, and salaries of the state officials were withheld, and it was in a major cash flow crunch. So, cut to today, it is running consistent surpluses for many years, and it has one of the lowest debt to GSDP ratio amongst all states. And the interest payments as percentage of its revenue receipts has gone down to 2 to 3%, which was once more than 25%. So, in this session, we aim to understand the story behind this fiscal turnaround. And since Sir has been at the center of this turnaround, so we would love to hear more from you on what were the factors that drove the changes, what external factors played a key role, how durable is the discipline, and has the fiscal strength really reached on ground? Has it translated into development outcomes? So Odisha is still in the bottom quartile of human development indicator, and it's also struggling with its own tax revenues. But it has come a long way, and we would also like to know from you, sir, where does it go from here? Over to you, sir.
Can we? Yes.
This is the clicker. Yeah.
Thank you, Shruti. Yeah. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you, Amarjit. Thank you, all of you, for giving me this opportunity to talk about something which I've forgotten about. This, of course, our principal AG, who would have audited us for a long time, is also here. I have been a part of the State Finance Department during the bad days and also during some of the good days. So I have seen both scenarios. And when this particular reforms were stitched together and rolled out, I happened to be with the Chief Minister as his secretary. So I have some kind of a ringside view of how it was done and this thing. So basically, my interest would be to present to you what was the situation then and how it has happened, and what are the current issues that we should be looking at. So I think very briefly, because time is limited, and I will basically show you what was the shape of public finances of the state in the late 90s, and how does it look, and of course some of the numbers Shruti has given. How did the fiscal crisis deepen during the 1990s? It was building, not that it happened only during 1990s. It was building during 80s, and uh, I think it precipitated during the 90s. And what triggered reform? And that's the story that is more important. What were the principal components of the reform agenda that was rolled out? What are the early fiscal outcomes that we saw, and what the current, of course, situation, and what are the some emerging areas of concern today, and what really bothers some of us, and perhaps bothers the state government as well. So that's the brief thing that I would like to share some of my thoughts. Now, two, three things. Let's see. First, look at the deficit indicators. And this is the last 3 years of the decade of 90s, with the revenue deficit itself was almost 3.5%. Fiscal deficit was average, and this is average. The 99 numbers are much more harrowing. 5.54% fiscal deficit. And if you look at 2022 and 2025, that's the 24-25 data had audited data is now available. So 25-26 hasn't yet come. So for those 3 years, I think the revenue surplus is around close to 3%, and fiscal deficit is 2.23%, well below what we could do. If you look at the debt figures, it has come down from 33% to 12.4%. And this is the lowest level of debt anywhere in this among the 28 states. Interest payment as a ratio of revenue receipts, total revenue receipt, has declined from nearly 30% to 3%. Of course, if the latest number would be around 2 point something. So this is the situation that we see. So two more charts. One, capex has something that used to be average below 2.4, around 2%. It's around 5% today. And committed expenditure, this is something is a marker of how fiscally solvent or stressed you are. Committed expenditure is a sum of salary, pension, and interest payment as a percentage of state-owned revenue. Normally, you take a ratio of total revenue receipt, but here I have taken state-owned revenue itself. It was 222%. That means if I was earning 200 rupees, I was required to pay 220 rupees towards salary, pension, and interest loan. So that is the level of bankruptcy that was staring at us. And today it is very comfortable of 54%. If you take the revenue receipt itself, it will be around, total revenue receipt will be around 28, 29%. Very, very comfortable situation. Now, the structural roots of the crisis really, as I said, deepened during the 1990s. It was building during the late 80s, but it really precipitated during the 1990s. One of the reasons is that our average growth during 80s and 90s, I think we call it lost decades in Odisha. 80s and 90s, if you compare the GSDP growth vis-a-vis GDP growth, I think well below, India, Odisha was terribly underperforming. So it was well below the All India GDP growth rate. The the committed expenditure burden was really unsustainable, as I've shown in the data, and the committed expenditure as a percentage of state-owned revenue was averaging around about 20%. The debt level was very, very high, and it was rising. It peaked around 40, exited around 40, 45% later in the after 1990. Salary cost far exceeded state-owned revenue, rising. I mean, salary cost alone, salary including uh, pension and salary together, it was more than what the state was earning. So if I was earning 100 rupees, I was required to pay 107 rupees towards salary and pension. in 1993. It increased to 160% by the end of decade, which is 1999. And that was largely as a, this increase because we took this pay commission award in 1997. So that was the final nail in the coffin, as you would like to say. Debt service cost, as shown, was very high. Capex deteriorated. Poorly functioning tax system. Very, state's own tax to GSTP ratio was declined. It didn't increase. It was below 4%. It declined to over 3.5% in 1990, 2000. Of course, the revenue and fiscal deficit levels are extremely unsustainable. The fiscal deficit, I think, the revenue deficit peaked at 5.38% and fiscal deficit peaked at about 8.01% in the terminal year of 1999 2000. Very severe liquidity crisis. And if you want to look at the fiscal health of any state, there are two markers you must look at. And this is what this will tell you whether the state is living beyond means or it is well within. One is your committed expenditure as a percentage of state-owned revenue or total revenue receipt, and the second is how many days did you resort to ways and means advance or OD. And the average for 1998 to 2000 was around 250 days in a year. If you take the working days of about 300 days, so out of 25 working days, 20 days, the treasury was literally closed or restricted. Simply, and Dr. Patnaik is here, he would know, who would simply disperse our salary in the first week, and then one guy in our department will severely restrict, not even withdrawal from public provident fund or somebody marriage advances would be, he has to come specially to this gentleman. He would give a special oral instruction. There was no written instruction to close down treasury, but that's how it was happening. And there were days on which we were, those days, if you don't clear the overdraft by the 10th day, the next day RBI will give you a stop payment order. So there have been many days on which we had to go to the chief minister, including Biju Patnaik. Late Biju Patnaik used to be the chief minister. So he used to feel absolutely, he was a very man of high self-esteem. He used to consider, he was made to speak to Dr. Manmohan Singh to bail out something. We are in the 9th day. So they gave us some advance and we cleared that kind of thing. And it's not this solitary, many instances. Several chief ministers had to intervene on our behalf to ensure that the treasuries, the ODM of stop payment order doesn't come. So that's the kind of situation we were in. What triggered reforms? Now, all that was happening during the 90s. Unfortunately, during the 1990s, despite the attempts that we made, we used to be, not that we have not broached the idea of reforms or restructuring during that period, but somehow the chief ministers were not very receptive at that time, including somebody like Biju Patnaik he didn't, in fact, he used to hate finance people. He said, you are already accountants. So the moment he would say, and Mr. J.B. Patnaik himself was a very, very well-meaning, he had very good understanding, but reforms, he was a political animal. He would say, no, there'll be a tremendous black backlash and I will not go for. What happened in 1990, and that was one of the worst years of the terminal year. Not only we were in the almost the rock bottom of finances, but that's the year that a terrible cyclone hit us. I think that was the first time India got to hear about a super cyclone. And not only it blew away large parts of coastal Odisha, it blew away the government itself. So there was election and a new chief minister, new government came, and a rank newcomer almost to politics came with no baggage, literally. He had no absolutely foggiest idea about how states function, he was, of course, a minister in the center, but he had no preconceived idea about how to run the government and all. Absolute clean slate. But there were very high expectations from him because his father was a very towering visionary and people admired him. So they expected a lot. And because he had literally terminated Congress rule for a long, which was there in power for a long time. There are a lot of expectations from him. But he soon realized that he simply didn't have any fiscal bandwidth, headroom to do anything, because every third day after the first week, the treasury will be closed. People will come and say, "Sir, do something, build that bridge, build that school, build that power station." He'll tell us, "Look at us." We'll say, "We'll have simply no money." So I think very soon, I think he started saying, "What do you do? I mean, this we can't run the government like this. What do you do?" Then we explained to him there are two options. Option one, you can continue like this. Situation will become worse from day to bad to worse. Now we are having 320 days of overdraft. It will become 365 days. It happened nearly in one. I have the data to show you. In one of those years before 2004, we had 340 days of overdraft in this kind. That happened. That is one. You will not be able to do anything. You will only pay salary and pension. Will try and do something, pay and salary, and then maybe in a staggered salary. We were not paying salary on the same day. We used to stagger it. The other option is we go through a hard time. We go through a program of austerity. There will be hardship for 2, 3 years, but we have reasonable expectation that things will turn around within 3, 4 years. And maybe you will have some headroom, but you will outlive your tenure. So he said, "Do I come back after that?" He says, "If you go through this and people, I mean, basically fiscal, this thing, people were not getting any benefit. If you continue like this also, they will, so your fiscal austerity program will hit the people who are already in the government, not people who are not in the government. Citizens will not be affected because their entitlements will not touch. One part of the reform will ensure that whatever entitlements people have, we will try and ensure that we will not touch that. And maybe soon after we turn around something, you can give something more to them so that you will buy in some political support." So that is the kind of grand bargain that we struck with him. And because he was a newcomer and he was not a veteran in politics, and I in fact have always said this, that we would not have been able to roll out reforms if we had a veteran as a chief minister, because he was a newcomer and he had a long, I mean, he came not for 5 years. He had a vision of staying in power for a longer period. I mean, internally, he's a far more astute politician than we all thought about him. Dr. Patnaik will tell more about him. But I think so the choice before him was to opt for the status quo and fritter away his political capital, or take a plunge and see what happened. So I think, demonstrated some amount of uncharacteristic political appetite for risk, and he opted for, he said, "Let's go ahead." But he said, "Try and minimize hardship as much as possible." He said, "Don't cut entitlements of employees. Sort of that, see, people are not thrown out of, there are no layoff, nothing, but sort of that, try and do something." So that's the kind of freedom we had. And it took some amount of this, persuasion. Of course, one thing, please remember that it was a coalition government. Very strangely, reforms have happened when governments have been not very, very strong. So, and he didn't consult the political allies at this thing. He hardly this thing, but he took his own call. Now, so I think, how did we do how did we initiate the reform? The first part, and we didn't want to do it in a hush-hush manner. And one thing that we told him, "Sir, whatever we do, we will take everybody into confidence, not only the legislature, not only everybody. Will put out a more open paper and white paper and explain to people what is the state of affairs and what do we intend to do and what is our expectation." So I think in 2001 March, we prepared a white paper, and that's still available. When I read the Kerala white paper today, I for sense of deja vu. I think almost, if you read that, Kerala's, by the way, committed expenditure is a part of revenue CD 77 today. So almost it mimics what we did in 2001. A separate white paper was presented next year on the urgency of reforming the public sectors. We had a large number of public sector enterprises which had almost wiped out their paid up capital, and they were a huge drain. The contingent liabilities were building up. Although you might not give them subsidies, the liabilities, all the borrowings they had from the bank guaranteed by the state, the contingent borrowings were building up. So these two white papers clearly articulated what was the state of the situation, and what are the broad contours of what we plan to do. This was done. So these reforms were rolled out in around between 2001 to 2004-5 in this thing. And first, to stabilize, we said that initially we will see some kind of stabilization. There'll be some kind of dip somewhere, but I think we expect a very sharp V-shaped reform outcome. But soon, in 2-3 years' time, our expectation projections showed that we will create a fiscal headroom for you to do something more meaningful. So that was what we did. And we got a lot of support at that time from DFID, from the central government, from World Bank, ADB. Everybody came together, and we got a lot of knowledge support in doing all these things, all the projections, all these things. And they committed support. If we do this, we'll get financial assistance to manage the transition also. So there were broadly 4 components of the reforms. The first was rationalizing committed expenditure and salary and pension. This was something that was absolutely, everybody agreed that this had to be done. So what we did is we didn't lay off anybody. What we did is as and when people retired, 75% of the attrition was phased out. And there were 2 exceptions, of course. We didn't touch health and education. No new posts, of course, were allowed to be created for a period of 4-5 years. So the estimated savings from that, according to a World Bank estimate, is about 36 billion rupees. We also introduced around 2004-5 the defined pension scheme. Of course, that was the government of India did, and we also did it. So we opted for that early itself. So that started stabilizing the committed expenditure component of salary and pension. The public enterprise reforms we had a voluntary separation scheme which whereby nearly 32,000 employees of VR. I mean, they were not even getting salary at that time. So we offered a fairly modest VRS package which was supported by DFID. We got a grant support for that. There was some kind of a retraining program which also went into it. And the government guarantees were also capped. They were, that was part of 11.2% of GSDP, and it was brought down to about 4% during 2005-6. Another very big component of the reforms was the debt restructuring program. I think that is where one of the biggest problems for Odisha was because slow growth, the debt sustainability was getting worse and worse. As all of you know, that its growth plays a very large role in determining how sustainable your debt is. So I think we got a lot of support for swapping high cost debt of 30 billion rupees during 2002-3 and 6-7. In fact, large part of a fairly substantial part of World Bank assistance we got, the temptation would have been to use it for all kinds of expenditure. But we and we found out the IRR this way by if we use debt for swapping high cost debt, the IRR was much higher than what would have got it otherwise. So we used, and the interest saving was 1.61 billion rupees per year annually. The tax reform is another thing. As we had shown that tax was absolutely declining. VAT, of course, was introduced in 2005-6. But capacity of the taxation agencies were built out with the DFID assistance, and computational commercial tax administration also happened. So these are 4 simultaneous reforms that were rolled out during that period. So all the engines which can fire fiscal restructuring fiscal reform were actually used for this. Now, look at some of the early evidence of what happened. And I'm not going, I mean, I'm just looking at early phase of the reforms, which is about the reforms. And we started seeing results from 2005-6 onwards. We started seeing results earlier than we had projected. And you can see the salary as a percentage of ratio of state-owned revenue, committed expenditure as a percent of SOR, interest all around 2005-6. It's up to 2004-5 it was rose, and 5-6 onward it started dipping. And fairly significant evidence of how reform was paying up was there. So from 5-6 onwards, Odisha government has not had any revenue deficit. I think this is a remarkable thing. No, not a single year we have had revenue deficit, and not a single year in which we have had to resort to, on any day, we have had to resort to either wage and mission advance or overdraft. This is again, I think, a rarity that. Now, if you look at tax revenue also, the trend is very, very clear. By 11-12 itself, which inched to from 5.2%, 5.8%. So fairly significant improvement in tax revenue. Of course, VAT effect is there, but if you do an good econometric exercise of regime change, you'll see a very clear evidence of regime change effect on taxation around 2001-2. It does show how regime change brings about improvement in this thing. We have done some work on that, and that is there. Own revenue as a percentage of GSDP also from 6%, it has gone up more than nearly to 2.5%, 3%. So on all these issues happening, deficit and debt, you can see the revenue deficit from around 5-6 it was wiped out, and consistently it has remained, and even today there is revenue surplus. Fiscal deficit, similarly, it has never exceeded, rarely exceeded 2%. There have been some years in which early years 5-6 or 6-7 we had fiscal surplus, which is not a good thing though. I don't think I agree that. Now, fiscal, again, debt sustainability, you see, from 32%, it peaked to around 50% in 2001-2. And by 11-12, it had come down to 16%. Below 20% is good enough. And today, we're around 12%. Now, there were, of course, it was not that everything we did, but as they say, fortune favors the brave. Some things that happened outside, some exogenous factors also helped us. One is the abolition of freight equalization early 1990s. This is one thing that was hindering investment, private investment in Odisha. But it didn't happen in 1990s because we didn't have the infrastructure. We didn't have money, we didn't build the infrastructure. How will private sector come? But around 2004-5, when the national economy started booming, we had created the fiscal headroom, infrastructure were getting built, private investment came. So freight equalization was a big factor in Odisha's turnaround, I would say. The second was the commodity boom, largely driven by China around that time. 4-5 onwards to 8-9, people were mining like crazy. That had its own, of course, other adverse effect. But the spurt in mining and mineral revenue was also very, very important. The high growth in the national economy, and that also helped. I think there's a very nice paper whether the growth that we saw in Odisha, was it by design or was it a matter of luck? So a lot of researchers attribute, because national economy was growing also, it pulled up many states, including Odisha. So debt relief schemes, recommended by 11th and 12th Finance Commission, they were very helpful, coupled with what we are doing, swapping their high-cost debts. That was very. And finally, in the later, this thing, the mineral auction, in 1990 on and 2019 onwards has been a huge benefit to it. Today, I think our non-tax revenue is as high as our tax revenue, which is the most perverse thing you can see. So, so that's a huge boon. But one thing, if you see the mineral thing, although many other states have minerals, not many of them have used this window very well. Odisha has done that pretty. Now, let me just take four. I'm sorry, taken more than. I'll take four, five, just four areas of concern. Having these are the what Odisha got right. I've said what perhaps Odisha is not getting right now. I would like to flag it for discussion only. I'm only showing some of the numbers. I did this very crude exercise. How much Odisha could have invested in capex during these years, potential, what I call potential capex, and how much it did actually. What is potential capex? The revenue surplus plus 3% fiscal deficit. That's the authorized borrowing limit. So that is as the quantity, that is the amount that I could have invested. Potentially, I could have invested that amount, and that's the orange figure that you see. Those are the numbers which show that was the potential capex space that was available, but consistently it has remained below, except one particular year, 1920 onwards. I think it has remained below, and the gap was very large during 2005-6 to 2012, 13, 13, 14. So we lost those golden years, and in fact, some preparatory action we started around 12, 13 to build, because you can't, unlike other expenditure, DBT or anything, capex requires a lot of prior preparation. You have to have a pipeline of projects. You have to do a lot of other things. You can't, it's not expenditure to be, to switch on and switch off. Tap on the tap nahi hota hai. So I think that requires some amount of effort, and we have seen some upswing from 2013, 14 onwards. But still, if you calculate just without any sort of any sort of discounting or anything, during 5, 6 to 13, 14, we frittered away at about 45,000 crores of capital investment. And if you take 2005 to 2025, close to 1.5 trillion crores we didn't use. So that was the amount of money we could have used for building anything that this thing we. So that's an area of concern for us, and that flags many other issues. Issues of capacity, issues of systems, issues of processes, and all that, and issues of vision also. The other second areas of concern Swati had flagged, and I just something that struck me, that this is kind of some kind of a Hindu rate of tax revenue kind of thing, 6%. Is it due to complacency? Some amount of complacency has set in because of mining revenue is booming. So tax revenue is flat, almost flat. In fact, last year the tax revenue, state's own tax revenue, has fallen as compared to the previous. So it's a very, very big area of concern, and the state has to look at it. Not the third area of concern is overdependence on mining. And of course, 21, 22 are the kind of a outlier year, but you can see the dependency on mining is very, very large, and volatility is equally large. So how do you insulate? Your good days will not always happen. There will be cycles. So how do you insulate the economy from cyclical factors that will affect mining revenue? Are you building some buffer? Of course, Odisha has done something. Odisha has created a buffer, sort of a budget utilization fund, but it invested in 2 years and stopped, 22,000 crore, and it has stopped. Prior to that, I think when I was finance secretary, I think also created a buffer at 25,000 crore, even those days, in the debt redemption fund and guaranteed redemption fund, CSEP and these things. So today, Odisha government has a investment of about 45,000 crores lying in at least 2 bad years we can possibly this thing. But I think we need to have a more structured approach to budget stabilization. The other area of concern and is budget credibility. Consistently, you see that and these are numbers given from the AG accounts figure. Again, we are stuck in 80%. Whatever is the budget, we said 2 trillion. We take a lot of credit, 2 trillion crore budget, but at the end of the year, it is 80%. It's again stuck in 80%. And more importantly, the program expenditure is also lower than that. So I think somewhere again, capacity issues are coming up. Either you're over budgeting, not with adequate preparation or something. So this is an area that has to be addressed. And finally, this is of course not peculiar to Odisha. Only yesterday, CAG has given the 24-25 report and he has flagged. But Odisha, I can see how the uh, climb is there. So how do you handle? I mean, and some of these subsidies are absolutely irrational, to say the least. I'm not against. No, I'm not saying that all subsidies are bad or this thing, but there are good subsidies and there are bad subsidies. There are merit subsidies and non. Although we can debate about what is merit, but certainly something like giving bonus for paddy procurement, I would strongly, just as central government has this fertilizer subsidy, which I administered for a year, unfortunately. So I think that many of these subsidies need to be seen. Is there a case for a more informed discourse on that? Can there be a political agreement on that to cap it at some level and put it as a part of FRBM is an issue that I'm flagging. So I think with this I'll stop. I have many other things, but I've taken away much more time. I have a lot of other things we can discuss, but hopefully we'll many other issues we can discuss during interaction. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. So your presentation has given me a lot of questions to think about and lots of insights to draw upon. But I will take those questions and insights to other panelists for now. Devashish, like to start from you. So sir has flagged multiple areas of concerns from capex, underutilization, overdependence on one source of revenue. So in your experience with the government, with the state, what do you think are the current priorities of the state? Do they see any of these issues as something imminent to tackle, or is this not on their list? If not, then what is it? How are they building their next fiscal story? What is it they're doing to solidify their finances? I would also like to know from you that from the presentation, we can imply that this was a very person in crisis dependent fiscal discipline that got imbibed. So, do you think this culture is still imbibed in the bureaucracy? So, your comments on that.
Uh, okay, thanks firstly, Shruti, and thank you everyone for coming. Yes, the government is concerned about all of these things. The government is always concerned about all of these things. I don't think there's any officer who goes to sleep without thinking about it. What are they doing about it? I think there's a few aspects to cover there. First is, I think, over the course of the last 15, 20 years that sir was referring to, Odisha has built excellent fiscal exchange and data systems. So that lays the groundwork for a lot of work that could be done by the finance or other departments to improve upon what they're currently doing. Now, what is missing currently is the analytical layer. So use of that data to make decisions often is absent, and it's typically 10% plus minus, etc., etc. That is the sort of base on which they can work. Now, let me maybe just take each of these. On the revenue side, I think my memory unfortunately does not go as far back as hers, but over the last 10 years, you must remember there are two major things that have happened. One is the GST. Typically, we tend to think that states have suffered as a result of GST. What we need to remember is that the center guaranteed a 14% growth rate of revenue every year for 5 to 6 years. Yes, and assume so Odisha is one of the faster growing states, let's say 8% a year for the last 5 years, add on 14%. That buoyancy is unimaginable. So the amount of money that Odisha made as a result of GST was far more than they may have lost as a result of any sort of shortcomings in that tax structure, etc. That is done, right? That honeymoon period unfortunately is over. The second was the mining aspect that Sir talked about. I think the shift to all the auctions, and he's absolutely correct. Odisha has done far better. Chhattisgarh comparatively has done far worse in terms of mining, auctioning those mines, and frankly activating them subsequent to auction. but the volatility remains, and especially the resource curse, as one says, is quite plausible here, because the fact of the matter is, I mean, twofold. One is your dependence on mining means that you're highly dependent on international commodity prices, right? I think in a couple of years back, steel prices had dropped and they saw a 5% reduction in mining revenue. That is massive. The second problem with that is that it is not typically growth that percolates onto the ground. It is highly tech heavy. It does not absorb as much labor. Most of it flows out of the state, right? So unless there's a downstream integration that happens in that state, it is likely to flow out of that state, the growth implications of it. So while mining revenue is giving them that buffer at the moment, it is not necessarily leading to any long-term growth, not by itself. Of course, there are potential avenues to it. The other tax streams, particularly on land, etc., have been particularly poor performing. Stamp duty, as an example, I think there's roughly about 5% of their own tax revenue, sir, if I'm not mistaken, comes from stamp duty, which is very, I mean, significantly lower compared to many other states. One of the challenges there is fairly straightforward, is the valuation aspect. I don't want to get into the technicalities of stamp duty, but I do believe that the government valuation of some of these land parcels has not happened in several years in many places, right? And so you can imagine that what the government sets as base tax rate versus what is the current market rate, the gap is widening, and that gives you that space to both evade as well as there is a loss for the government. So that's the sort of tax story there. GST, of course, it's dependent on many things, primarily the sort of economic growth of the region. There is, of course, administration and evasion challenges, no doubt about that, but there are limitations to what you can do with GST barring administration as a state government, because the tax design is outside your control. But the tax design and several of these other taxes well within your control, perhaps not being looked at. But the finance department, as far as I can say, at least in an open forum, is particularly concerned about these things. On the expenditure side, I think what we need to think of is that, yes, Odisha has created that fiscal headroom. I think where it has sort of, I mean, the perverse effect of what has happened is that in the process of trying to cut down your committed expenditure, there is a large gap in the number of people you require to deliver services versus the number of people you have. And so more recently, the government has announced, I believe, 1.5 lakh, 1.5 million, I don't remember the specific number, jobs to be hired. But then the problem with that is you're not really thinking in terms of where is the maximum ROI for that particular person to be hired, right? The sort of corollary to that is that in the absence of hiring these people, much of your infrastructure spend is not particularly useful. You have to think of it in two kinds of infrastructure, right? One is general public use, roads, etc., great. But when you come to hospitals and schools and all, you spend money, but there's no person to run it. If there's no doctor, what do you do with the hospital building, right? So that infrastructure spend also then loses its quality effect. So that HR piece is something that is going to be a primary objective for the government. And I think a large part of it requires sort of very serious workforce planning. The HRMI systems that Odisha has lend themselves to a certain degree to it, but there are gaps within that. And that cleanup also now is required along with merging it to IFMIS. A lot of states have done that. I think Odisha is also in that process, but there is some more work to be done there. The second element of Odisha's expenditure is the equity financing aspect. So if you compare, let's say, while you have the mining sort of aspect to it, the fact of the matter is that a large part of the state, therefore, is not available for infrastructure development. It is not easily accessible. It is not accessible for government services or much else. Now, if you just compare the social or other growth indicators, demographic indicators in terms of what NFHS 5 says, 6 says, etc., there is a stark gap between those outcomes within the districts that have primarily tribal populations versus the rest of the state. And if you bring those tribal districts slightly up, Odisha will leapfrog over multiple states. It is not that the state is doing poorly. It is certain areas which are absolutely untouchable right now in terms of what can be done there. Now, there are two modes in which equity-based funding is available to the state. One is the district mineral fund. And this is perhaps one of the biggest opportunities that cannot be lost. Odisha, I think, accounts for about 40% of all district mineral fund money in the country. Much of it is sitting idle. There is no central visibility in terms of what is being spent. Much of it is perhaps not even being spent for what it's supposed to be spent for. According to recent Government of India guidelines, 70% has to be earmarked for priority sectors, including health, education, etc. But you will often find there have been cases that the CAG has found, I don't want to speak on behalf of the auditors here, but the CAG has found, for instance, stadium being constructed out of DMF, right? What is the use of that? So there is a DMF element development. Then there is the SCST, sort of the sub-plan aspect of it, where Odisha, at least I believe, sir, if I'm not wrong, had earmarked 40%, but their legislation had a 10-year sunset clause, and that has now run out. So now there is no legislative backing for Odisha's 40% expenditure. Right. So while they continue to do it pro forma, I think the point is that at some level, if there is a department which is not meeting that 40% mandate, there is nothing the government can do about it. Even within that 40% mandate, there are the challenges to be looked at, right? In the sense that because the departments are mandated to spend 40%, they will sort of end up eventually plugging variety of things which are not necessarily targeted equity expenditure. So for instance, there is a general purpose scheme. Right. So the way I would look at it, let's say there is a guarantee scheme where 5,000 rupees is being given out to everybody. What they will do is they will calculate the 5,000, the total population, take the percentage of SCST, and then say that we have given this under the SCST fund because the 5,000 is anyway going to them. Similarly, if there's a road project, if it is going through two habitations which are ST dominated, then they will say that about some percentage of that infrastructure fund is actually for the ST subplan, whereas obviously it has no direct bearing on it. Those sort of two equity funds are probably the biggest opportunity that Odisha has to tackle that very specific geographical and demographic incidence problem. It is a very specific problem, remember. It is not a general state needs to do better. Of course, every state needs to do better. But Odisha in particular has to tackle that challenge in order to grow. And it's a very, very difficult challenge. Nobody's saying it's easy. But that's where it's at. I don't know. Have I run out of time? Okay, I have run out of time. Okay, I mean, I'll answer anything you want later. But I think these are broadly the 2 or 3 things. And I think the data available with Odisha, either for workforce planning, for an incidents, for understanding whether capital will have an ROI, or are you just constructing something for the sake of constructing it? Much of this is possible. We are hopeful that we will work with the government and sort of support them in doing some of these things. And as you know, the question you started, the government is definitely losing sleep, and there will definitely be very, very high activity. Thank you.
Thanks, Devashish. Prabhat, I would like to ask from you, I think 3 things in particular. So one is that the most common problem among states is that we do not have money. But this is a very counterfactual case that you do have money. So now what? So if you could elaborate on that. Second is that you have worked extensively with third tier of governments at local levels. So how do you see the fiscal prudence within the state translating to the local level? Have they been able to utilize it as much as they should have? Have they built those capacities? Third, also what Devashish also touched upon, that DMFs are not utilizing their funds, and it seems like a problem of both capacity and will. So what, in your experience, say needs to be tackled first?
Thank you, Shruti. Thank you for inviting. Thank you, sir, for the excellent the kind of scene story, what happened and what led to the change. I think if we think, and I have been working with local governments in Odisha for last 6 years almost. What the key learning is, money is there, but we are not able to utilize it. And recently, 6th Finance Commission came out its report. Of all the money that went in, almost the devolution money, almost 70% expenditure was there. Non-devolution money, all the granted at, it was less than 50%. The 6th Finance Commission almost doubled the transfer to the local government. So whole capacity to kind of the spend itself is pretty limited. And we know expenditure happens through autonomous body, local governments. There are n number of kind of implementing agencies which does implementation on the ground. There has been a lot of reform in finance department, in treasury. We have set up best of the IT systems, best of the data is being generated, but has those percolated to the implementing agencies or department itself? That's a thing of question itself. I haven't seen evidences of where urban development department is using treasury or expenditure data quite frequently that is being generated from IFMIS to manage to monitor the expenditure itself and to kind of timely see which agency to release the money, how much, where there is in fact need of the money. And also many of the kind of money sits outside the overall treasury system itself. We know the bank accounts, and there has been attempts at kind of reducing the number of bank accounts or amount parked in the banks is still it hasn't been a kind of 100%. A lot of money still sits out of the kind of treasury system. Last year around May, I think state recovered around 4,000 crores from different implementing agencies. And let me tell you, it's not the entire money that is there. There's still a lot of money sitting in the bank accounts. So how do we kind of move from where you are using the data systems with the treasury to kind of monitor the kind of the departments? And also there has been uh, uh, beyond expenditure or beyond expenditure numbers, we don't have much visibility on what's happening with the expenditure. That too in the public sector enterprises as well as autonomous body itself. There has been some active kind of work on setting up project management systems. I think currently finance department is working on one. Panchayat, it's already been implemented last year. Urban, it's kind of getting implemented right now. But whether those systems work on the ground or not, whether they capture 100% of the overall transactions, is still kind of we have to see. The second thing I think Sir also touched upon is the execution capacity, and Devashish also kind of reflected upon it. Uh, the number of people kind of in the government to prepare the DPRs, to sanction the it's not enough actually. Also, the expectation, I'm coming from the local government itself, the expectation from the governments have changed multifold. The kind of work that they are supposed to do have changed. They are supposed to kind of fight for air pollution, best of the sanitation, best of the drainage system. Now we have to run buses as well. All of these, our engineers are not trained. They are more trained to make roads and nully on the side of both roads. That's it, or some buildings. So how do those same engineers kind of prepare better DPRs, prepare roads? And in fact, one example that I want to quote, we were working on some change design of the roads where kind of you make better urban road designs. And it was a disaster actually to get those drawings made and implemented on the ground where people were not able to understand the designs itself. So the overall quality of the kind of the human resources itself is a problem. Also within the we have been able to reform the finance department, but have we able to reform the line departments? Is there enough capacity? And I will talk from the urban development department perspective. Is there because it works as a microcosm of the government itself. The budgeting in the local government, if you want to fix accounting in the local government, you want to fix the property tax, is urban development department structured in a way where they have the staff who can undertake this kind of reforms? Do they have people who understand IT systems to build and to implement the IT systems on the ground? So, sir, investment have been made in those IT systems. A lot of consultants have come, went, but still those systems are not being used. So how do we improve that? And how do we create the capacities of the line department itself? I think the third thing is overall effectiveness of the planning itself. Are we able to plan for project? Are we able to identify projects that are needed? And the fifth one would be kind of, is there any active conversation? Sir mentioned about the white papers that were presented, and there were active conversation around the ecosystem where people were kind of talking about the reforms, and there was pressure as well. When you talk and you don't do, then there is an accountability. Then the social accountability, public accountability. Is there such accountability in place? Do we have kind of institutions we are looking at the data? Is data available to those institutions? Most of the data is sitting behind administrative data is within the government system itself, where public or research institutions, and Bhubaneswar has some good research institutions as well, who are working on public policy, who are working on public finance. Do they have access to these resources itself so that they can hold the government accountable? So that's also kind of, there is a need to build that ecosystem for reform itself. I think if we are able to kind of do some of these things over next kind of 5 to 6 years, where kind of using data more effectively, looking at staffing and bringing in that execution capability. Many of these things we don't have to think in the way where there might be a case we don't need more staff. We need some specialized staff with some kind of with the tools, with IT tools, with the templates, everything. We can do much more with less staff, kind of. So we need to think about overall the staffing pattern itself. The third thing I discussed about was a capacity of reform within the implementing agencies or the department itself. The fourth is effectiveness of the expenditure, like looking at the project plans, where the people are able to prepare pipelines, and kind of last building a broader network of people, network of organizations who are working on these reforms and holding government accountable.
It makes me think that Odisha is one of the states which is hailed the most for its finance, its reporting, but it's still so far behind. I'm wondering how much other states have to catch up. But sir, moving on to you, it would be nice if you could provide the point of view of bodies like DFID. How were they seeing this crisis when the state approached them? And sir mentioned a white paper on public sector enterprise reforms also. So, how far do you think the PSC ecosystem has come? How much of a burden are they still on the state? And sir mentioned in his presentation that as a measure of expenditure rationalization, there was a job cut that happened. So, do you think it still reflects in any way in today's public service delivery?
The outset, I think, as was expected, a masterly presentation. Thank you for this, sir. When Shruti asked me that we want to do something on public finance, turnaround stories, and so on, I couldn't think of a second name, because we have seen how it's an example of how evidence-based and research-based efforts to restructure public finances on that scale. I remember being on the other side. At that time, I was working with the Department for International Development, the UK government's body, as a human development advisor. And we would travel to Odisha very frequently, different studies at different points of time, some in finance, some in education, health as well. And interestingly, a lot of the direction of the studies was determined by the team of the state government, not by DFID. I think that was the strength. For example, it was the only state which in education and health wanted organizational development studies. They wanted to look at the structure and institutions. Is it delivering what it is supposed to? Where are the misfits? Which are the misgovernance elements there? So I think this notion of governance and financing going together clearly made a difference. The question that Shruti asked, as Sir had also clarified, health and education did not suffer cuts even in the worst of times. The efficiencies of systems improved, and in particular about the health sector in Orissa, I can say the period that Sir is referring to, post 2005, has seen very remarkable and significant changes in Orissa. Deaths due to malaria, infant mortality rate, maternal mortality ratios, while there have been national level changes also, but Orissa's deficits in the primary care system were much more. And from that point of view, I think with a series of very outstanding civil servants in the health sector, they have actually given very, very good results. In the education sector also, they have challenges. There is a historical baggage and legacy for sure. But the reforms or cutting down state expenditures didn't hit them. Where it worked best, perhaps, open-ended bleeding agreements, I'd say power sector reforms. If something had gone wrong, they had the courage and the conviction to set it right. Public sector, the guarantees. Whole lot of issues where we presume that this is going on and on. So the strength was that it was very evidence-based. Agenda was determined by the team there. It's interesting that when Sir was leading the process, he also brought in some experts from different services there to help him in finance. I recall an Indian Audit Account Service officer, P.K. Mishra, as Special Secretary Finance, doing this work of reform. So a central government officer brought into the state to provide for support for this. That was the commitment that the state had. The point that Sir also mentioned, and I'd like to raise this here, the issue of human resources was raised. Now, I say this in a slightly different context, not the context of Orissa alone, but nationally. See, the way public finances are, and I'm now wearing the social development hat, which is what I like to wear. When you look at education, health, nutrition, and other sectors, these are sectors that need human resources. They can't do without it. The manner in which our public finances are organized, the central and the provincial governments have all the share. Local governments, it is their responsibility, but they have very little own sources of revenue to manage these sectors. So we have the paradox of the 11th and 12th schedule saying local governments should look at education, health, nutrition, and so on. But the paradox is that the resources for these are going from central and provincial governments. As a consequence, many a time, state governments are reluctant to create new posts of teachers, A&Ms, nurses, doctors, because they don't have that level of resources to support. As it is, 75 to 80%, in some sectors more than 95% is coming from state revenues. So many efforts in the past during the 5-year plan period, the position was supported for the plan period. At the end of the plan, everything went to the states. And the finance commission cycle and the planning commission cycle weren't the same. So many states took 2.5, 3 years to decide whether to do this at all. So even if Operation Blackboard and all, they got support, they got it for 2 years, then it went off to the states. Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan and the National Rural Health Mission started a very different thing, and a realization by central government that you needed sustainable finance to expand the system. What did SSA and NRHM do right? It said that, okay, if state government has 100 vacancies of teachers and health workers, state government's responsibility is to fill up those 100 vacancies. But if the larger system requires an additional 500 posts, for the new posts that the state creates after filling up its own vacancies, central government will step in on a declining scale from a 65-35 support down to 50-50 and so on, encouraging states and handholding so that the created positions were required. It did work for many years. If A&Ms, nurses, teachers could be appointed on a large scale, one of the reasons was this element of sustainable financing. Over the last some years now, this is missing. We are looking at capex, infrastructure, but this element is very, very important. Now, what is the fallout of this? If I look at the budgets of the central government as well and the states, sector after sector which falls under the social development category, you will find BE higher than RE higher than actuals for a long period. While I am all for better data management, better financial reforms, if it were to happen in one area, say education, I could have accepted the education sector was not prepared for it. But if it happens across a few social development sectors, it raises a systemic issue. Did we push the single nodal account and PFMS without the preparedness for it? Sir is aware we have both worked in the Ministry of Rural Development, which was the first one to use PFMS for single nodal accounts. But we spent 2 years to map every account down the line. Subodh would be aware, he was very much there at that time. If it was not for Sanjeev Kumar, RAS and FA, we would not have been able to do it. To actually map every account where the money is getting transferred. 4 states, we had done an end-to-end study and then implemented it. Whereas when we have implemented it nationally, were the states prepared? Were the sectors prepared? If they were not, then I think it has become... So I think I raised this issue in the larger context of public finance, where there are sectors with high human resource requirements. Provincial governments and their revenues and resources seem inadequate for the expansion which is required in many of them, given the size of the young population and so on. Unless we think through some of these issues in the public finance transfers, because even the state share issue with the centrally sponsored schemes, the experience varies across programs. There are some programs for which there is ownership by the states. They don't default on the state share on those programs. PMGSY is one example, the rural roads. Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin is another example. The National Rural Livelihood Mission is a third example. So many of these programs, because it is popular in the states are willing to put the money there. And states have developed innovative ways of doing it. There, a single nodal account can be very useful. When part by part, there were states which every month would release some state share instead of doing it at one go. So there are many innovative practices across states, but I'm raising this issue because overall our challenges are in social development. Our public finance mechanisms adequately addressing that challenge, is there something missing in the mechanics and the dynamics of how we transfer funds? It's an issue that I think needs attention. The last point that I wish to make is again the example of Odisha, the issue of financing and governance. We see them as silos. I think time has come. We need many more organizational development studies, because what was a regulatory administration is now doing development functions. There are many skill set gaps, many deficits of human resources in key positions with key skill sets. Now, instead of looking at the governance financing linkages, if you look at them in separate silos, we are missing out that larger play of how do you reform systems to deliver quality outcomes? How do you make a government institution like a school, health center, or a Anganwadi center like a community institution which is well looked after? Where are those gaps which are causing pain in terms of the quality of services and the outcomes finally? Clearly, this is a big public finance question which needs to be answered. As we address deficits, we need to address the governance deficits also. Fiscal deficits is one part of it, but the governance deficits are equally important. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, sir. We have some 25 minutes now. I would like to open the floor for questions, and you can raise your hands, whoever wants to ask, and I would request everyone to please use a mic. Yes, Priyadarsh.
Thank you so much for the excellent presentation and incredible discussion remarks. So I think taking on from our previous conversation and also the presentation that you made, Odisha has the money, it has the problems, and they are not matching, in the sense that we need more initiatives and solutions to solve some of the problems. So in your experience and assessment of both being in the government and outside of that, what is the driver of the solutions? Clearly, lack of money is not the problem. Consistency of bureaucratic relationship is not the problem. I mean, there are many states where bureaucrats change so fast that there is no enough leadership. Consistency in political leadership is not the problem. Political will is not the problem. Is it, as I think one of the discussant mentioned, the lack of pressure groups external to the government that are kind of keeping the government? What is it that will drive this need to create solutions, whether it is HR training or working with the private sector? Or why isn't Odisha the best state of India? It has everything to be. Why isn't Odisha going down the history books as there it was and now here where it is? So just there. A few questions.
Okay. Yeah, hi.
Am I audible? Okay, hi, Prabhat, great presentation. And sir, of course, I just wanted to, you mentioned about the roads part. So that comes under the skilling and training. And a few days back, I'm first time here. So there was a lot of talk that MBA is done. So engineers are done. So it's all about skilling now. So being a very great state with great assets and great, so is the government now with full will under the leadership of the center? Are you working on that because you have minds and everything? So skilling, new generation skilling, students actually working and forgetting that inhibition that I'm an engineer, I'm an MBA, I cannot do plumbing. But that's the future. You need to be a plumber at the same time. And, so will that happen in the future generations there?
Hi, thanks, Jugalji. Excellent presentation. I was trying to find out that what are some of the general lessons from Odisha's experience. Like I work in Delhi, but I'm from Himachal, right? And like, it's a bankrupt state. I don't know there's any other word for it. And the two things which struck: one, get your politics right, and second, be lucky. Both of them are unfortunately like not generalizable. So, what would a lesson be for a state where both of these are not happening? Because then you are, unfortunately, in a bad spiral, right? And while it is easy, I guess, to get the technical right, of course, you require political cover. But how do you solve these two problems, or at least what would the way forward on this be? So,
Yeah, sure. Okay. Okay. First, I think why Odisha isn't the best state with all this. I think first thing I mean, we have this, I always say this, Odisha, and we discuss about, we have this fiscal responsibility and budget management law. And I've been a long time finance secretary. I said I give full 5-star on fiscal responsibility. On budget management, I give 2-star. I think one of the things I think solution has to come largely from within. I think my first this thing is that if the 2000 early 2000 reforms also, it was not that it was imposed or mandated, or unlike the what happened in Government of India, it was the DFID or World Bank. We realized ourselves that there is no option. There is no option for the chief minister to deliver except to go downhill. So you have to admit that you have a problem and look for a solution within. And then see what are the things that, and then you can take experts like our gentleman Devashish Prabhat and all people like and former Amarjit kind of people to say, hey, we have this problem. This is what some of the solutions we think. Do you think we can do a better solution? I think unless you admit first that there is a problem and this problem has to be solved. And other thing I see that everything, whenever we encounter a problem, we hire a consultant. He say, you solve our problem. There is no ownership of the problem. I think much of the finance department reforms happened during 2009 to 2013. And I was every little bit of work that you can check today, it was absolutely driven by a committed set of people whom we train. And today they are absolutely, they were the drivers of reforms. The consultants, external experts helped them to roll out the reform, design the reforms and all. So I think one of the things that Odisha, I think, needs to do today is to seriously try looking, first admit the, contrary to what Devasi says, I don't think there is enough recognition of a very deep problem. This question of underspending budget is something I've been saying for ever since I retired from government. Because I have the freedom to speak more freely outside also. Within of course, I always spoke what are these things within the thing, but I was in finance secretary from 2013 after that. So I think we look for, admit the problem, look for solutions within, take the best possible people to help us. And there are people who are willing to help. On tax reforms, we discussed, and recently as a part of, I happened to be in a committee where I thought, I can't say. So we are getting some very good persons to work on tax reforms and look at it. And he is very confident that we can raise it by 1.5% to 2%. Possibility is there, and he's working on that. On project management, first thing we noticed that, and this is what, again, something I've been saying, we have large projects. How do we monitor these projects? Does anybody know what is the current state of the project? Is there a project management apparatus that I can see which project is delayed by how much? And there is absolutely no. So we first report that the committee we gave was how to monitor large projects and what we need to do to hasten project implementation to within time. What are the reforms we need? So similarly on capacity, and we spoke about this thing. You see, there were genuine. In fact, part of the problem of employment and appointment in critical posts was kind of a self goal. Fiscal solvency has come from 2005, but we could not do any recruitment for till 2015 because we had messed up our reservation policy. So with the result that for 10 years, the government did not roll back that order. For 10 years, there was no recruitment. Now today in schools and colleges, I think there is only 20% faculty, regular faculty. Rest all is guest faculty. This is no way to run. So I think as I said, we managed shortages very well, but we don't know how to manage the surplus. I think the art of managing surplus has to be learned and learned the hard way. In every other state, you rightly said, they have an alibi, credible alibi that I don't have the money. Here is a state where that alibi is not available. So I think somewhere around that, lesson for Himachal. I think first thing we all the time we blame the politicians, and politicians have very rightly they have a very limited vision. Very few politicians have long range vision. But then I think we have to. I mean, what is our role? Our role is to sort of cajole them, nudge them, educate them, inform them, and say that look, if you do some amount of reforms this way, there is a ray of hope at the end of the tunnel. So there is, without that, nothing can be. Nobody can reform your luck will favor you if you do take the plunge. So I think, and I don't think, I mean, today at least the macroeconomic situation is much better and things are much better. Himachal had the privilege of getting the special category state. You got all the tax benefits. All the industries went to Himachal and Uttarakhand. We used to, in fact, those days we used to envy Himachal. Why? So yeah, my guess is if politicians, we work with the politicians and try to sort of get them to do not even, I'm not saying that do 100%, but if you do 30% reforms, these critical sectors, and these are some without cutting people. I think first ground rule is don't try to cut people's entitlement in any reform program. If you do that, I think you can generate a lot of political goodwill for reforms. It will hit bureaucracy, no doubt about it. That is very hard to avoid first period. But to the extent possible, I mean, we, for example, we didn't freeze the DA, we didn't freeze their, those things we happened. But people's entitlement must be protected. If people are getting PDS, must be protected. If people are getting pension, must be protected. So only then we can generate goodwill. So that's my short answer to that.
Prabhat, you would like to add?
I think just I will respond to. I think on the skilling, some initiatives are underway, but still, it's they have to see light of day, and it's a long way actually. So there are some work that Devashish and team are also doing. State government has launched some initiative as well. I'm talking about Urban Development Department, and I think at the Chief Secretary, at the kind of planning department or Chief Secretary level as well, some initiative have been launched on capacity building, not just training itself, but overall training is one part of it, but overall kind of what you need to do on daily basis. So there is some efforts underway, but it's a long way. And it's not just about existing people. How do you get new people as well? And adding new people is not easy, and there are various kind of both pro and cons to it. And how do you manage that and get new people and train existing people? So some initiatives, but it's still long way to go. And also, I think participation of normal people like me or anybody else within the government itself is it's not it's not, I haven't seen this that much in country. I'm not sure about other countries' example. So even if we have a large workforce that is unemployed, skilled, that we can debate whether it's skilled or not. But even if they are skilled, how do they participate in creation of public goods? That problem, I don't think it's solved.
Can I just intervene? Sorry. We had a meeting with the state level training institutions as a part of, and we wanted to see what is the state of training and capacity building. About 28 institutions, state level institutions. Not a single engineering department has a training institution. Very strangely, none, whether public health engineering or roads engineering or building engineering, none has this training institution. Urban Academy has been set up, but very, I think, just about rudimentary. I think skilling of engineers and is very, very important. I think Amarjit referred to PMGSY. I think one of the important component of PMGSY was continuous retraining of engineers in good practices, new materials, new technologies. That is, unfortunately, that culture has not seeped into many of them.
The floor is still open. Questions? Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for the very insightful presentation. I track state finances very carefully. So, sir, like you mentioned that the capital expenditure is one below the potential, and also it's also been below the budget estimates. Sir, I would like to know, what are typically the reasons, what are the challenges that a state faces when consistently it's not able to meet its budgeted capital expenditure?
I think first you must have a robust pipeline of projects. If you don't have a pipeline of projects, ready to plug and play kind of projects, you will not be able to. So just budgeting 10,000 crores for a project will not take you anywhere. First, what is the project? Have you prepared the DPR? Has it been peer reviewed? Have you acquired the land? Have you got all the clearances? Have you started the procurement process? So these are, and then you have a good monitoring process. Are you able to pay, the contractors regularly? In fact, as PMGSY program manager, I used to see only one data point: what is the value of work done and what is the payment done? If there is a big gap, work will slow down. If regularly payments, are up to date, people will take up. So I think one of the reasons why we are underspending, we are not prepared to spend that much. We are budgeting for projects which are not ready to be grounded. And without that, you cannot.
Sir, am I audible? So almost 37% of Odisha's GDP is coming from manufacturing, mining, and the allied sectors to it. And now this is more than Odisha's share that comes from service sectors. Considering the FRBM limit that we have and the revenue, we don't have a revenue deficit, we in fact have a revenue surplus. So is it possible that by increasing and taking a bit more risk on the capital expenditure side, maybe we can have a manufacturing boom, considering Odisha's significant amount of Odisha's labor does a migration. So we don't have a lot of blue collar jobs to absorb it. Is it possible to have a manufacturing boom taking a bit more risk?
One more question.
Yeah, sure.
So that should be fine. But Odisha has also led the way in life. So, hi. Thanks so much for the presentation. Odisha has also led the way in analyzing budgets in terms of releasing gender budgets and child budgets and things like that. But clearly, that's still not translating into development. So how it's not enough to do that analysis. So how do we do some decision making based on that analysis?
First, can in Odisha trigger manufacturing? If you see the media, I don't know whether you track the local media, every day 1 trillion crore of investment proposals are being signed. My problem, those numbers, I'm not going to comment on that or anything, but Odisha is focusing largely on mineral-based, hard-to-abate industries. Aluminium, steel, cement, and power. highly, they're not hard, they're very, not only resource intensive and very hard to evaluate in terms of climate change effect also. And they're highly capital intensive. They don't create jobs. Unfortunately, we have not focused as much on labor intensive manufacturing, which is where, and as you rightly said, much of our labor force is working in those sectors in Surat, in Tamil Nadu, and elsewhere. We need to bring them back. And why will they come here? What kind of, I mean, those you are offering all the, I mean, it's just the incentives you offer are as good as anybody else offers. So I think we need to work out a way of how we can, and one of the things that we're thinking aloud, and today that's the problem of why private sector investment is also muted, because GST is truly not GST. Input tax credit on capital goods is not being given. So where is so if you could neutralize spending, the tax effects on capital goods, you could attract a lot of manufacturing. And Odisha is in a position to do that. I mean, not many states can do it, but fortunately you have the resource opulence to sort of go and say, okay, I will truly give you GST, the true classical GST benefit if you undertake investment here in these sectors. Target those sectors. Think strategically, and so that you can create jobs. I think focus on jobs, labor intensive manufacturing, by carefully and more sort of creatively tweaking the tax policy could be one way. What? Okay. Yeah, as I said, in terms of, as I said, budget documentation, I said it's 5-star. Everything, anything you risk statement, climate budget. No, but you open the climate budget, what is there? It is almost big. I think just you're right. Having those budget documentation is not enough. Having the intent to do something more meaningful. Otherwise, what is happening, as he rightly said, how do you apportion? Okay, gender, this program, so many women will be, so Anganwadi, 90% is fully gender. So it's just merely accounting and polishing up number to present this thing, but the intent to do something going beyond that is not happening. And as I said, that's something that nobody can, you have to do. The will has to come from within. And just to this thing, the mandate of, you mentioned about the mandate. Actually, there was no mandate. The mandate was there was a concept of plan, sub-plan. We have done away with planning. So nothing prevents you from earmarking certain percentage of spending your program budget for the sub-plan areas even today. So I think there was no legislative mandate as such.
Just two comments, sir. I think one thing has come out very well, that India as a whole, even in the provincial governments, we are essentially lacking what is called as the public investment management. You have rightly pointed out so many things, that we don't plan the project, we don't design it, we don't do proper studies, and so I think largely this is one big issue. I think people have also commented that the engineers are not trained for this. So I think this is one thing. I don't know who has to take it up, whether the central government or somebody has to take it up, that public investment management is a big, I mean, people are saying people are not, the states are not able to spend the money on projects. So public investment management is one of the key areas where probably the central government has to take a lead, and then with the help of the state governments, I think, build capacities for doing that. The second is on the resource, as you rightly said, sir, Odisha is resource rich. You kept away some funds partly and then left it. I think the Norway model for their own pension fund, what they now call it as a pension fund, earlier there used to be a petroleum fund. I think that is one model, because Odisha is the lone state which has this, I'll call it as a problem. So unless there is a formal policy on the use of the extra resources that we are getting and how to long-term manage those resources, where to invest, how to use those funds, who's going to use those funds and all that. I think that policy needs to be there in Odisha.
I think both the comments are, I fully, one is public investment management. Whether central government will take the lead or not, I'm not very sure. But I think people, as you said, maybe in Niti Aayog, somebody should flag it to the Niti Aayog. Niti Aayog could possibly set up some working group. But even states can, those who have the fiscal headroom, they should do this. On the resource manage, I mean mining mineral resources bounty, how do we manage? Long time back when I was finance secretary, I had requested, in fact, I had advised the Odisha Mining Corporation, which is things we said, create some kind of a sovereign wealth fund.
Yes.
But somehow they registered and they didn't do it. Today we have a budget stabilization fund. But there the problem is the RBI only manages. They don't allow you to do anything. They simply park it in the GSEC. I think there needs to be some debate on allowing the states to set up wealth funds and create, sort of manage them independently. That's whether that kind of fiscal freedom will be allowed by the central government and RBI is this thing, but they know. For example, the accounting methodology for the consolidated sinking fund also is so faulty that I have parked my funds that if I withdraw that money, it hits my fiscal deficit. Very faulty accounting. Very perverse. Of course, fortunately, in case of budget stabilization fund, they have corrected it. But we are, from the commission side, from the committee side, we are working on a paper on budget stabilization, how to create a budget stabilization mechanism. Also, as part of that, we will perhaps re-emphasize the need for a sovereign health wealth fund to be created in. So we will argue for that.
I think we're coming to a close now. I will request the panelists, Devashish, Prabhat sir, if you have any final remarks to offer.
No, not really. I mean, sir has covered everything. I think just in response to Gunjata's question, what he was saying is correct. So if you look at the budgeting cycle, as it were, there is the budget preparation, there is the budget execution, there is the budget reporting. Unfortunately, the gender budget, the child budget, etc., largely remains in the budget reporting realm. It doesn't really get into the budget preparation realm. So in that sense, I mean, I remember the problem is that there is such a mandate that in many cases it doesn't really even make much sense. I mean, perhaps I'm not best placed to say this, but I remember several years ago I was just looking at the government of India's gender budget, and the first entry there is the Department of Atomic Energy. And they're running some crash scheme, and so therefore they're reporting it in the gender budget. What business does Department of Atomic Energy have to do a gender budget? But they're required to, and so therefore they do it. कुछ mandate मिला है तो comply तो करना पड़ेगा. So anyway, so the point I was trying to make, Gunjata, is that therefore, while we're trying to sort of work with sort of governments to help them plan their budgets better, these ingredients of equity, effectiveness, efficiency have to feed into it in a more organic manner rather than stating that this much percentage and this much going to this. To your question, just on a lighter note, I think India has very recently gotten pipe water and sewerage connections and so on. So maybe plumbers will need some time from now. We've not really needed them as much so far.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Odisha has an excellent skill institute, World Skill Center. I would commend any one of you who is listening to it. Do visit World Skill Center. Fantastic facility. Yeah.
Thank you. So now I would like to officially close this. And if you have any questions, you can take it outside with the speakers. I would like to thank everyone, sir, for coming all the way from Bhubaneswar, all the panelists, Amarjeet sir, for very kindly putting us in touch with Jugal sir initially. I would also like to thank the comms and events team for managing it. And lastly, Lavish also is not here though today, but he nudged us to do this. I think the lesson for me is that what Odisha got right, those are the lessons that other states can learn from it. But the way forward is that now it needs to learn lessons from other states who got these things right. So on that note, I would ask you to proceed to the outside and have tea and coffee. Thank you so much.